Erin Corwin believed she was about to get engaged. On June 28, 2014, she woke up early, kissed her husband goodbye, and drove into the California desert to meet the man she loved in secret. He had promised her a surprise. Her friend in Tennessee had already sent her a ring emoji. What Erin didn't know was that her lover had spent the past week researching how to dispose of a body. By nightfall, she would be lying 140 feet deep at the bottom of an unmarked mine shaft, a homemade garrote still wrapped around her throat. She was 19 years old and pregnant with his child. Erin Renee Hevelin was born on July 15, 1994, and adopted shortly after by Bill and Laura Hevelin, a devoted couple from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Growing up in the green hills of East Tennessee, Erin was the kind of child who would get upset if her mother killed a spider in the house. She was quiet, shy, and found her greatest comfort among animals. Her mother would later recall that Erin was happiest on the back of a horse. The East Tennessee Riding Club became her second home. If she could have, she would have slept there. It was at that very barn, sometime around 5th grade, that Erin first met a boy named Jonathan Corwin. They didn't start dating right away. Years passed before John, now a young man with plans to join the Marines, asked Erin's parents for permission to take her out. He chose her 16th birthday as the occasion. Bill and Laura gave their blessing. John seemed like a gentleman, the kind of young man any parent would approve of for their daughter. Their courtship was wholesome and hopeful, and the two exchanged poems. They dreamed of a future together. In November 2012, barely 18 years old, Erin married John in a small ceremony. Less than a year later, in September 2013, the newlyweds packed up and moved across the country to the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center at 29 Palms, California. The base sits at the edge of Joshua Tree National Park, where the Mojave Desert stretches endlessly under a punishing sun. It was nothing like Tennessee. The transition was hard for Erin. She went from a bustling household full of siblings and animals to a small apartment in a remote military town where she knew no one. John's deployments and training exercises left her alone for weeks at a time. But slowly, Erin began building a life. She started volunteering at the White Rock Horse Rescue Ranch in nearby Yucca Valley, where she could be around the animals she loved so much. She also made friends with her neighbors, other young military wives navigating the same isolation. Two of those neighbors would change her life forever. Christopher Brandon Lee was a 24-year-old Marine from Anchorage, Alaska. He lived next door to the Corwins with his wife, Nicole, and their 6-year-old daughter, Liberty. The Lees and the Corwins quickly became close. The couples would barbecue together, watch television shows side by side, and drift in and out of each other's apartments like family. While their husbands were on duty, Erin and Nicole would eat lunch together and talk for hours. They even volunteered at the same horse rescue ranch. To anyone watching, they looked like two ordinary military families supporting each other through the challenges of service life. But Christopher Lee was not an ordinary man. Fellow Marines had noticed troubling signs. He displayed a reckless disrespect when handling weapons, treating rifles and rocket launchers like playthings until a superior officer finally scolded him. He spoke about playing Russian roulette in the mornings, claiming he let a loaded revolver decide whether he would live another day. He was erratic, volatile, and desperate for a sense of heroism he felt the Marines had denied him when they rejected his request for deployment. Erin saw none of this. She saw a friend who listened to her, who paid attention to her pain when her young marriage began showing cracks. In February 2014, Erin suffered a miscarriage. The loss devastated her. John, I consumed by the demands of military training, couldn't be there to comfort her the way she needed. The fractures in their relationship, which had started as arguments over money and mutual accusations of overspending, now deepened into something darker. Erin felt alone, Christopher Lee noticed. One evening in February, the two couples gathered at the Corwin apartment to watch a popular zombie television series. Erin, disturbed by the violence on screen, excused herself to the bedroom to play video games instead. Christopher followed her. They sat together on the floor, side by side, controllers in hand, and then one of them paused the game. They looked at each other. They kissed. That single moment detonated everything that followed. Within weeks, Erin and Christopher were having a full affair. They exchanged messages filled with promises of a future together. Christopher told Erin he would leave Nicole. Erin imagined herself becoming a stepmother to little Liberty. Christopher even wrote her a poem. Like it or not, you still hold a part of my heart, he wrote. Ready or not, we were gonna get caught. Don't give up and I won't too. Hopefully, like me, you still think I love you. What Erin didn't realize was that she was being manipulated by a man far more experienced in deception than she could imagine. The affair did not stay secret for long. Nicole Lee grew suspicious of her husband's increasing emotional distance and searched his phone. She found the intimate messages between Christopher and Erin. Her reaction was volcanic. She confronted her husband with a tirade that stretched for hours. But then she did something even more devastating. She told Jonathan Corwin everything. That night, both marriages exploded. Erin and John fought bitterly. When Erin tried to leave, Nicole, her eyes burning with fury, screamed threats at her. Both couples promised the affair was over. Both couples tried to move forward, but it wasn't over. Within weeks, Erin and Christopher resumed meeting in secret. Erin believed his promises. She believed they would be together. And then, on June 22nd, 2014, she discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no question about who the father was. She told Christopher the news, expecting joy. What Erin Corwin didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Christopher Lee had never intended to leave his wife. He had been manipulating her from the start. Now, with her pregnancy threatening to expose everything, he saw only one solution. In the days before June 28th, Christopher Lee's behavior shifted from deceptive to methodical. He told Isabella Megley, the owner of the horse rescue ranch, that he had been exploring the desert and discovered something exciting, a remote mine shaft that nobody would ever find. He asked to borrow a white propane tank from her property. She thought nothing of it. On his computer, Christopher searched for information on how to dispose of a body. He told a fellow Marine, seemingly out of nowhere, about a chloride plant near Amboy and asked about security systems and dumping bodies. The Marine remembered Christopher making a list of items and prices that included a shovel and lye. Meanwhile, Christopher invited Erin on a special day trip to the desert. He framed it as a romantic celebration of her pregnancy. Erin was thrilled. She texted her friend Jessica in Tennessee to share the news. "He has a surprise for me," she wrote. Jessica responded with heart emojis and a diamond ring. Erin admitted she was hoping for a proposal. On the morning of June 28th, 2014, Erin Corwin woke her husband around 7 o'clock. She told him she was going to Joshua Tree National Park to scout hiking trails for her mother's upcoming visit. She kissed John goodbye. She told him she loved him. He said he loved her too, rolled over, and went back to sleep. Those were the last words they would ever exchange. Erin drove her Toyota Corolla to a remote meeting point in the desert. miles away from the national park she had mentioned to John. Christopher was waiting for her. He had loaded his jeep with a Winchester .22 caliber rifle, the propane tank, gasoline, and a homemade garrote constructed from 2 pieces of rebar and nylon cord. The romantic proposal Erin had dreamed of never came. Instead, Christopher made his intentions clear. He told her it was over. He was leaving for Alaska with his wife in a matter of days. There was no future for them. According to his own later testimony, they argued. At some point, Christopher approached Erin from behind. He wrapped the garrote around her throat, and for at least 5 minutes he squeezed, cutting off her air supply until she collapsed to the ground. He checked her vital signs. She was not breathing. Christopher Lee then dragged Erin Corwin's body to the mine shaft he had scouted days earlier, an unmarked vertical drop into darkness. That he pushed her in head first. She fell 140 feet to the bottom. He threw the propane tank and other materials down after her, intending to ignite the shaft and destroy any evidence. The fire failed. Then he drove home. By evening, John Corwin was worried. Erin had not returned. He called her phone repeatedly, more than 50 times by the next morning. There was no answer. On June 29th, he reported her missing. The vast machinery of a missing persons investigation began to turn. Detectives initially suspected Erin might have simply gotten lost. Joshua Tree National Park covers more than 790,000 acres of unforgiving desert terrain. But when Erin's Toyota was found abandoned several miles north of the park, far from any hiking trail, the theory of a simple accident collapsed. The location made no sense, unless she had never intended to go to the park at all. Investigators began digging into Erin's life. They discovered the affair with Christopher Lee. They interviewed Jessica, the friend in Tennessee, who revealed that Erin had been meeting Christopher in secret and believed she was pregnant with his child. They learned about the confrontation with Nickel and the supposed end of the relationship that was no end at all. On July 1st, 2014, 3 days after Erin vanished, detectives brought Christopher Lee in for questioning. He was cooperative. He did not ask for a lawyer. He admitted he had kissed Erin, but insisted they had never had sex. He claimed their relationship had ended months ago. When asked about the Saturday she disappeared, he said he had been alone in the desert, hunting coyotes. In July, in the middle of the Mojave, hunting coyotes. The detectives didn't believe him, but without a body, they had no leverage. After 9 hours of questioning, they were forced to release him. Days later, Christopher Lee completed his service in the Marines. He loaded his wife, his daughter, and their belongings into a truck and drove to Alaska, more than 3,000 miles away from the desert where Erin Corwin lay rotting at the bottom of a mine shaft. The search continued without him. Over the following weeks, 6 law enforcement agencies joined the effort. Search and rescue teams combed more than 300 square miles of brutal desert terrain. They searched more than 100 mine shafts using dogs trained to detect human remains and specialized camera rigs lowered into the darkness on cables. The effort consumed more than 5,000 hours. The case might have gone cold if not for 2 critical breaks. First, Isabella Megley remembered a conversation with Christopher Lee from the week before Erin disappeared. He had told her about exploring the desert and finding a mine shaft that no one would ever locate. She shared this with investigators. Second, Doug Billings, a cave and mine expert, volunteered to help narrow the search. He spent over 200 hours cataloging mines in the region, cross-referencing their locations with cell phone data and the photographs that Christopher Lee's friend had taken during their desert exploration. Billings created a prioritized map of the most likely locations. On Saturday, August 16th, 2014, nearly 2 months after Erin's disappearance, searchers descended on a cluster of mines in the Rose of Peru mining district. At approximately 5:30 in the evening, a caver named Luca Chiarabini approached an unmarked vertical shaft. A festering odor wafted from the opening, a stench of gasoline mixed with something putrid. He lowered a camera into the darkness. At the bottom, crumpled among debris, lay the remains of Erin Corwin. A homemade garrote was still wrapped around her neck. The recovery operation took 2 entries into the toxic shaft. Erin's body was airlifted to the morgue and identified through dental records by 9:30 that Sunday evening. Half an hour later, at 10 p.m., Christopher Brandon Lee was arrested during a traffic stop in Anchorage, Alaska. Inside the vehicle he was driving, beneath the front passenger seat, police found another homemade garrote, nearly identical to the one that had killed Erin Corwin. The trial began in October 2016, and more than 2 years after the murder, prosecutor Sean Doherty methodically built his case, presenting a mountain of evidence. A .22 caliber shell casing found near the mine shaft matched Christopher Lee's rifle. A Sprite bottle recovered from the mine contained the DNA of only 2 people, Erin Corwin and Christopher Lee. Internet search records showed Lee had researched body disposal before the murder. The propane tank found at the bottom of the shaft was traced back to the horse rescue ranch. But the most stunning moment came when the defense called its only witness, Christopher Lee himself. In a courtroom confession that shocked everyone present, Lee admitted he had killed Erin Corwin. He described approaching her from behind, strangling her for at least 5 minutes, checking that she was dead, and pushing her body into the mine shaft. He recounted it calmly, almost clinically, like he was reading from a script. Then came his justification. Lee claimed that Erin had confessed to molesting his daughter Liberty just moments before he killed her. He argued this revelation had sent him into a fit of rage, making the killing an act of passion rather than premeditation. The prosecutor demolished this claim. There was no evidence Erin had ever harmed Liberty. There was no prior mention of any abuse. There was no logic to the idea that a man would research body disposal, construct a garrote, borrow a propane tank, and scout a remote mine shaft days in advance, all because of something he would only learn in that moment. There was no evidence Erin Corwin was molesting his daughter other than from him, Doherty told the jury. The jury deliberated overnight. By the next morning, they had their verdict. Christopher Brandon Lee was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury also affirmed a special sentencing enhancement for lying in wait. On November 29, 2016, Lee was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the courtroom that day, Erin's mother, Laura Hevelin, addressed the man who had taken her daughter. "I cannot understand why anyone would think murder is okay," she said. "How that would get rid of your problems. All Chris had to do was move to Alaska and change his phone number." After the sentencing, Laura described the weight that lifted from her shoulders. She had carried an unbearable burden for more than 2 years, grief so heavy she could barely walk. The verdict brought a relief she compared to the day she had finally been able to adopt Erin, the day all the uncertainty ended and she could give her daughter her last name. Erin Corwin was laid to rest in Tennessee, back in the green hills where she had grown up, far from the merciless desert that had become her grave. A candlelight vigil drew roughly 250 people, many wearing custom shirts bearing her name. At the East Tennessee Riding Club, purple ribbons still flutter on the fence, a reminder of the shy girl who loved horses and believed in promises that were never meant to be kept. Erin Corwin's story is a devastating reminder that the people we trust the most can hide the darkest intentions. She was 19 years old, full of hope, and believed she was driving toward a new beginning. Instead, she drove straight into the arms of a predator. I want to hear from you. What do you think drove Christopher Lee to such a calculated act of violence? Was it fear of exposure or something darker? Share your thoughts in the comments. If stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe. We uncover cases like this every week, examining the evidence, the psychology, and the pursuit of justice. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant,